Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world and what time it is. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Today we're celebrating Women's Day, so happy International Women's Day to each and every one of you. And I hope you have all had a chance to read the blog and that you're really clear what your own personal pledge for parity is. So let's take a look at that, Pledge for Parity. Our research demonstrated that progress towards gender parity in the last 30 years has been almost negligible, despite lots of structural aspects that have already been covered. As one of my clients told me the other day, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. So now, to cause parity and to cause real parity in the world, we need to go further, we need to look deeper, and we need to work harder. As I said in the blog, in the same year, the World Economic Forum did some research, and they said it'll take till 2133 before there's actual parity in the workforce. Now, my commitment is that it doesn't take that long. It doesn't really need to take that long, does it? And if we're going to speed it up, it's actually going to be down to each of us to cause that shift. We can't expect organisations and governments to do it for us. We've got to own it. And inside of the Pledge for Parity campaign, so let's look at what they say. They've identified 5 areas in which we can pledge for parity. So let's start with the first one. And the first one is help women and girls achieve their ambitions. So I'm going to read to you what they say. They say that the most important determinant of a country's competitiveness is its human talent via the skills and productivity of its workforce. So we're going to focus on this webinar mainly at what we as individuals can do to pledge for parity in these 5 areas. In fact, we're going to focus very much on the first 3. Women's Day identify organisational actions and individual actions, and on the webinar we're going to look at the individual actions that you and I can take to commit to parity for ourselves and for the women around us. So here's what they say about helping women and girls achieve their ambitions. Individuals can commit to advocating for themselves and, when appropriate, becoming effective role models and sponsors of women to help them achieve their goals. The second area is challenge conscious and unconscious bias. They say that studies show that gender-balanced organisations and teams deliver stronger results and that inclusive societies are more progressive, but ingrained bias slows the progress of equality. So it's very important, as they say, for us as individuals to commit to learning about our own biases. What are your own biases? Adjusting your behaviour as needed, and welcoming different experiences and points of view. So this, I think, is a very important area for us to focus on, and once we master conscious and unconscious bias, we can start to impact some of those areas that we find challenging. The third area is a call for gender-balanced leadership. They say companies with women board members outperform in return on equity, on net income growth, and price to book value, as well as a host of non-financial measures. We all know that, don't we? The data is astoundingly obvious and clear. So as individuals, we can show potential or current employers that we value and expect gender-balanced leadership, not just for ourselves, but for others in our teams as well. We should seek out leadership, sponsorship and mentoring programs, exposure to strategic and financial roles, and integrated networks that are designed to help us as women advance. The fourth area is value women and men's contributions equally. Raising the female labour force participation rate to match that of men will have a positive impact on GDP, they say, in both developed and in developing economies. Individuals such as us, we can seek out perspectives that are different from our own. We can prioritise building diverse teams and engage in mixed networks that build trusted relationships. And the final area is to create inclusive and flexible cultures. Here's what they say. After competitive pay and benefits, workers in 8 countries rank working flexibly and still being on track for promotion as what they value most in a potential job. IWD's advice to us as individuals is that we create trusting, team-oriented work environments by encouraging flexible working, supporting choice about the times, places, and ways in which work gets done. So I asked you in the blog to look at where you're going to pledge for parity. What is your pledge for parity? And to be fair, I thought I ought to share with you what my pledge for parity is. So here you go. In terms of the first area, help women and girls achieve their ambitions, I have met recently a lot of young women who want to advance, who are really struggling or who don't see how they can move forward. And their organisations aren't necessarily going to pay for them to develop themselves. And they don't have a huge amount of money. So what I've looked at is a low-cost program, a webinar and Facebook community, where we can really support you in being successful, reflecting on some of the questions that you've asked in a bit more detail. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. In terms of the second area, the challenges of conscious and unconscious bias, one of the things that came up really clearly during our research, so it's not just about gender, it's also about age, and different generations experience a lack of parity in different ways. So we've just kicked off a research program and we're doing a little bit of work with Ishreen, and we're going to do our own research as well to look at how does age impact the dynamics. So that's where we're looking at unconscious and conscious bias. And then the other 3 areas, through our round tables and through our research, we've identified a culture transformation program that'll impact gender parity. In fact, it'll impact all kinds of parity, but we're focusing on gender, and it's a multi-stream transformational program, which I'm very excited about, and we're going to be piloting this year. So you see, I'm in action, and I hope you're in action too. And we really want to hear what you're doing to support yourself in a pledge for parity. And our coaching, you remember we always have a 1-hour coaching call with me as a prize for your tweets. So here's what we want you to do for your tweets this time around. We want a video. So listen, if you're conscious about video and you're nervous about it, you're of course welcome to use text. But just know that the people with video are probably more likely to win, okay? So we want you to tweet and complete this sentence. My pledge for parity is, okay, and say whatever your pledge is, and create a little video on your phone and then tweet it. And we'll take a look at those, and the best tweet, the best video will win an hour's coaching with me. So I hope you're going to play with us on that. We're looking forward to really seeing what you're causing for yourself and for others. Okay, good. So let's get into the 5 specific areas that International Women's Day has identified. So the first is to help women and girls achieve their ambitions. We had some really interesting questions from you in this area. The first is this one. How do I encourage the idea of more female leadership starting from me? I have very few female leaders in the company, and this is a challenge that many of us face as we progress in our careers. And do you know what? The lady who asked this question, I really love that you asked this question that's looking at how you can contribute. And it can be really very challenging, can't it? A lot of women who progress think they need to be very alpha. They've adopted characteristics that are like men that have helped them to progress. And when they get to a certain point, they think that they've made it, they've caused it for themselves, they've had to work so very hard, and everybody else should be able to do that for themselves. I think everybody points to Mrs. Thatcher as the perfect example of that, right? And there are a lot of women in organisations who relate that way, but there are also a lot who try to support and help and nurture the women behind, coming up through the ranks with them. And I want to share with you an example of a woman I find very inspiring. She's Dr. Kamal Hodhi, and she's the head of responsible business at Lloyds Bank. And she started in a very challenging way her career. She started without a degree. She didn't go to university at first. Her family basically wanted her to get married and have children, but she knew there was more for her, and she went for it. And she managed to get support from her family. She started out in the bank at the most junior level, and she progressed. And it's really interesting listening to her speak. Out in the regions, she said she didn't realize she was any different from anyone else. But as she grew through the ranks and she was based in the corporate headquarters, she was looking for other people like her, more women, more coloured people like that. And she noticed that she was really on her own. So she took the initiative to create a diversity network. Well, she didn't call it a diversity network at the time, right? She just thought, well, let's get more people like me together and look at what challenges we face, because I'm facing challenges. And she did that. And she did that really effectively, so much so that she was invited to various high-profile events by the senior people at Lloyds Bank. And at one point, quite unexpectedly, she was asked to come on stage and share her experiences. And people at the bank who heard her were really impressed. And that's one of the things that gave her a leg up. So she had the courage to speak. She had the courage to take opportunities. And through her learning and through her development, she has created mentoring programs within the bank to support young women, young Asian people. In fact, people with diverse specialisms and expertise and characteristics. And the way she mentors, I find very inspiring. She takes almost a maternal approach. She identifies people with potential, or if people with potential, like one of her mentees that I was lucky enough to meet, Ramal Sal, approached her and said, do you know what, I find you a really inspiring woman, I'd love you to be my mentor. And Kamal started mentoring her and shared all her experiences, and it becomes almost she uses the word family. Of course they're not family, but it's almost like you nurture and look after your protégés like you would your son or daughter. And that's the kind of relationship that I think we as women can bring in a mentoring situation to support other women. So that's my advice there. The next question I think is so important, so important. What advice would you give parents of young girls? Now I'm going to give you 5 tips, but you know these apply to boys as well as girls, right? But I'm going to just say that, you know, if you've got a girl, it's probably more important because generally they don't get this kind of nurturing. So thank you very much for asking this question. So here's what I say. Number 1, always focus on their strengths. Talk about what they're great as. One thing I remember about my parents was when they'd come home from the teachers' consultation, you know, they go every quarter or so to meet the teachers and get some feedback. They'd come back home and they'd say, you can achieve whatever you want to. And that lesson is tip number 2. Just let them know that they can. Yeah? Many of us may sort of think, oh, well, you know, that's not for the likes of you. You may think, you know, that's too challenging, or that's a man's kind of job, or, you know, there are all sorts of conversations, and this is kind of pointing to unconscious bias in a way, right, which we'll come to in a moment. But always let your daughters know that they can, rather than they can't. Nurture their interests. Very often we tend to focus and bias our children towards our interests or what we think they should do. Give them a wide range of stimuli to look at and nurture the things that you see they're interested in. Encourage them to explore, encourage them to go out and look at various different types of career, look at different women who are successful in various industries and let them choose. And also, as parents, I think it's our responsibility to make sure our girls go into fields where there's a demand for them, where they can thrive. So look at what areas of work are growing in demand. So clearly we all know nowadays technology is a leading area. So encourage your children to find out about technology. Encourage them to find out about all the growing industries and sectors and support them and nurture them. So if I may, I'm going to indulge myself and share a story with you from my own childhood. So I'm 10 years old and I'm lying on the bed with my grandma. She's over from Sri Lanka to spend the holidays with us. And all of a sudden she asks me this question. She goes, Ishreen, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'm really surprised. No one's ever asked me that before. So I think for a while and I say, well, I might like to be a teacher or maybe a nurse. Now, why do you think I chose those two? It was because those are the role models I'd seen. I hadn't seen women doing anything else. But my grandmother, now this is a woman born in 1923, right, who created her own business in the 50s. So she's, I was really moved, I'm really moved now, reflecting back, that she would have so much ambition for me. She said, and she said it in a really smart way, because she knew I loved my granddad. And she said, you know, your granddad really wants a female doctor in the family. And I was like, oh, a doctor? I'd never thought of that. I never thought I could be that clever. Right? But it got me thinking. So the reason I share this story with you is, not because I went on to become a doctor. I didn't. It wasn't what I was interested in. I was interested in engineering. But the fact that my grandmother asked me that question at 10 years old raised the game for me and gave me the opportunity to create the life that I have for myself. So that's what I'm encouraging all of you to do for your daughters. Ask them what they want to do and raise their aspirations. You'll be amazed at what they can become. So now, let's move on to the challenge of conscious and unconscious bias. Here's a quote that came in from one of you, and it's on the one hand quite shocking and disappointing and upsetting. You say, I sincerely asked my previous boss how to better approach potential clients, and he joked and said I should go clubbing and learn how to be picked up by boys. Then I'll know. I felt terrible after hearing this. And do you know, my first reaction was how terrible as well. How could a professional manager say that? And then I stepped back, so let's look at conscious and unconscious bias. Was he really meaning to be offensive? Did he want to upset you? Maybe he was just a little uncomfortable and nervous because he didn't quite know what to say. And some people react that way when they're nervous. So he may have been reacting from an unconscious bias, right? He may not have been aware that what he said would cause offense. He may have thought you'd take it as a joke. Or it might have been conscious and deliberate. And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know what was causing him to say that. But if we look at and give him the benefit of the doubt, that he could have been just uncomfortable and unaware that he was going to offend you, that could give you more power. Because if you get offended and feel uncomfortable and shut yourself down because of what he said, that's not going to help you. Okay? So the other thing to get from conscious and unconscious bias is that we all have it. We all have conscious biases. We all have unconscious biases. We might not want to acknowledge it. We might not want to admit it. But the moment we accept that, we can be less judgmental of others. And the moment we're less judgmental of others, they find it easier to work with us and dialogue with us. So the first thing for you to do is to learn about your conscious and your unconscious bias. So the fact that this questioner says, how do you cope in a male-dominated department, implies that you already have some thoughts about what it is to work in a male-dominated department, which gives you some biases. So it's useful to look at, so what are my feelings about this? What am I thinking about the fact that I'm in a male-dominated department? And it's useful to understand what your own bias is here. What is your conscious about being in a male-dominated department? Is it that they're not going to take you seriously? Is it that they're not going to give you great work? What sort of thoughts come to your mind? And it's very useful to write them down and to understand what they are. And then look at, is there anything below that? Is there anything that I'm actually unconscious about right now, and can I bring it into my consciousness? Because the moment I do that, my behavior is not automatic. My behavior becomes more considered, and I can apply some emotional intelligence to it. And then play with that, okay? So let's look at the next set of questions here. Now, I love these 3 questions. Okay, so it goes, how does a female leader get things done without appearing too strong or too demanding? Why do women need to be more social, focus on relationships and less task-oriented to be considered successful leaders? And how do you handle being labelled as combative when you're trying to just be confident? So you can see from a previous blog that we posted, this is in the realm of the alpha versus fluffy spectrum, okay? So some women join the workforce and think, oh, if I was more like a man, I would be more successful. So they start to copy male behaviors in the workplace. Now, the double bind with that for you, if you do that, is that actually men don't value those behaviors in women. They value them in men, but they don't value them in women. So you want to really look at the impact of copying behaviors that you see as successful from the unconscious bias perspective. So men don't necessarily know that their unconscious bias is telling them that a woman with male behaviors is distasteful to them, or they don't like it, or it's not feminine, or it's not what they expect. They don't necessarily know that. But because they have this unconscious bias, they automatically behave that way. So you need to be smarter. You need to look at who you are and be your authentic self. So I talk about this a lot in the book, my book that's coming up, and I'm happy to say the 8th of April is when it will be published. So so look out for that. And there's a whole chapter on this, on how to create yourself and present yourself as who you truly are. Because presenting yourself any other way ain't going to work. It's going to work against you. Because people can see through that. Some people may think it's manipulative. Some people may think it's not natural. There are all sorts of different unconscious biased views that comes to the front when somebody is trying to be who they're not. And that's why I love this question about, where is it? When you're just trying to be confident. Don't try to be confident. Be confident. Know who you are. When you know who you are, your authentic self, you will automatically be confident. You don't need to try. The moment you try is when people get put off, because it's not natural. So I hope that gives you some tips on how to use unconscious bias to support you in behaviors and ways of relating to whether you're on the alpha end or the fluffy end and how other people perceive you there. Remember, just be your authentic self and then you'll be very successful. So here's another question. As a young woman trying to progress my career, I find that I'm coming up against the obstacle that male leaders in the organization presume that I will be planning to start a family soon, and this is getting in the way of my progression. So this is clearly unfortunate for us women who haven't had our families yet. But again, this comes to unconscious bias. Think about where they are, their point of view, and where they're coming from, and try not to resist it. Right? So often when we know that our manager or people in the organization are assuming that we'll want to start a family, we get angry, we may get upset, we may think, well, that's not true about me, why are they doing this? It's not true. The moment you do that, your barriers go up, you become resistant, and it's very off-putting to the other person. They feel threatened. They feel that they don't know how to support you because they may be coming from a perspective of, let me help you plan your career, given that at some point you might want to have children, which clearly is a fair thought. But if that's not on your mind, then it upsets you because you just want to focus on your career. So the trick here is really to be open to their point of view. Consider that for some managers, that's all they know about the role of women. Their wives, when they may have had careers, but when they got married, their wives let their careers take precedence. When the babies came along, it was their wives who took time off. And some of their wives may never have gone back to work, some may have gone back to work at a more junior capacity, and some may well have gone back to work and been really successful. But it may be that their unconscious and conscious bias is framed by what they know of the women in their families, and that may not necessarily apply to you. So here's the tip here. Welcome their point of view, don't resist it, and then have a conversation with them. Maybe ask them, do you know what makes them think that? But ask that question not from a defensive space. Ask it from a really curious and inquiring place, because you'll be surprised at what you hear. And when you ask them and invite them to share their points of view, they will then be more open to what you have to say, and then you can start to create your career in a very productive way and in partnership with your manager. The next area is call for gender balanced leadership. Now, I saw a really interesting question from one of you, and you kind of challenged me actually to make sure I covered this point by saying if I didn't, then I'm brushing it aside. So here I am, this is just for you. So the question was about there being a lot of talk regarding women being in the minority in sectors like STEM and supporting them in being successful, but that in traditionally female-dominated environments like cabin crew or HR, in those female-dominated professions where the female managers have an unconscious or conscious bias who don't promote balanced leadership and provide opportunities for men. So my view is it has to cut both ways. Parity is parity. It isn't for women and it isn't for men. It's for both, right? So you as a leader, you have to show that you value and that you expect gender-balanced leadership, whether it's a male-dominated environment or a female-dominated environment. And that is what Parity is all about. It has to be balanced leadership. I want to share with you one of my client stories. So Women's Day advise you in this area to seek out leadership and sponsorship and mentoring programs and to get yourself exposure to strategic and financial roles. So I want to share with you this story about Tina, my client. Tina approached me about 2 years ago now. And she was in middle management and she wanted to be successful. In fact, her story is covered in the book as well. She wanted to be successful. We had our first meeting. It was quite a funny meeting because in the first meeting she said, I want to be CEO of my company in 5 years' time. And I smiled because she works in a very big company, and to go from middle management to CEO in 5 years was very ambitious and what I might sometimes call a pipe dream. So we had a conversation about her life in general, her broader life. She'd at that point decided that she wasn't going to have children because she wants to give equal time. If she had children, she'd want to be a perfect mum and a perfect colleague. So it was not practical, and she'd given up on relationships because she'd already had one or two bad relationships. Now you might think, what has this got to do with executive coaching, right? But I firmly believe that we are a whole person, and who we are at work is influenced by who we are at home. So hence the conversations. And then we looked at her career and what she wanted to achieve. She was working in the legal department. She had a very technical legal background, functional expertise, and during our first year of working together, we created a plan for her. We looked at what her values were, her passions, her proposition to the organization, and we really identified that her international skills and her legal skills would be brilliant for any high-tech company, but that she lacked some commercial skills. She'd never worked in a commercial environment. So what did we do? She took on a secondment into a commercial unit, a product development marketing unit, and she did a brilliant job there. She did such a good job actually that they wanted her to move over. So she moved over, she got a promotion in that process, and she developed these commercial skills. She's now such in demand because of that. She combines commercial, technical, legal and international skills, and she can bring people from around the world together to look at what's going to make a product very successful on a global scale. So why do I share that story with you? So here's an example of a woman who did sponsor herself to become successful. She knew that if she had a coach, she could develop herself much faster than her peers, and she has done. Okay, so seek that out. And she also could see in our conversations that she needed to develop strategic and financial skills. So leaders may not be willing to undertake formal coaching sessions. So how do I receive some coaching informally? If there's no mentor coaching in the company you actually work in, how do you advise in getting one? Should I go to networking events? So absolutely you should go to networking events, right? But look out for mentoring schemes, look out for networks. One of the schemes that I'm working with is called Fast Forward 15, and it's designed to support women in the MICE sector, the meetings and events sector, to progress. And it's a free scheme. And I give my time for free, and everybody who works on that program gives their time for free. Why? Because 78% of the women in that sector, 78% of the workforce in that sector are female, but about 1% are in senior positions. So there's something got to be done to cause a shift in that sector. And it may be the same in sectors where you are. So look out, there are bound to be mentoring schemes that aren't very expensive that you can join. There'll be networks that you can join. And of course, if you're interested, our Pledge for Parity program that we're providing might be of interest to you, and you're most welcome to join us there. So I guess my advice there is really just look out, seek out ways to be supported. The final question in this section, no, there are two questions. So the penultimate question, should women be focusing more on business strategy, finance and leadership rather than networking. So I'd say you need to be focusing on all of them. Definitely, as you progress, you'll need more financial skills, more strategic skills. So start to develop those. We've referred in the blog to the MOOCs, the free courses that you can get from really great universities, you know, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, all providing free programs on the internet where you can develop skills that you may need in your career. So invest in that. Mainly because not only is it free, but also you can do it in your own time. So whether you have a family or you're traveling or you've got elderly parents you've got to care for, whatever it is that you've got to spend your time on, you can do these courses in your own time. So do take time to research them. If you Google MOOCs, MOOCs, you'll find them. So definitely invest in those skills. Okay, I love this question. This is such an indulgent question for me. So, who is your mentor and what makes them a great mentor? So you'll see 3 pictures on there, and they represent mentors from 3 different eras in my career. So the gentleman on the left, Phil McKinder, I was about 1 or 2 years into my career, 23 years or so old, and in a very male-dominated environment, wanting to progress, wanting to contribute, but not really seeing how. And then Phil came in as our group manager, and I could immediately see a similar kind of energy, a similar kind of enthusiasm. So I went up and I spoke to him when he was very early into the business, and we built this relationship. And at that age, Phil was mostly giving me projects that would develop me. Right? So he was giving me advice and giving me projects and almost telling me what to do. In your 20s, you want somebody who's going to guide you and tell you what to do, because you don't necessarily know of the wide range of opportunities available for you. So that's Phil. Be forever grateful to him, particularly because he's the person who championed sponsorship for my MBA at London Business School. Something I wouldn't have been able to do at that age if my employer didn't pay for it. So then we move on, and we're now in my mid-30s, and in the middle you'll see a gentleman called Rick Super. Rick really supported me in the transition from being in the corporate world to running my own business, and he developed me to be a brilliant coach. He developed me to be somebody who could set up and grow a business and to be confident in myself. And this relationship in your 30s is more about giving you ideas and letting you run with it. So a mentor, if you're in your 30s, you want somebody who's going to really provide a gentle fuel that'll help you to grow, and you can find your own way, you have more knowledge like that. And now my mentor is the amazing lady on the right, Faye Sharp, who started off life in a council estate with a single parent mum, and she grew to develop an events business which she sold for something like £25 million within 10 years. Very inspiring woman. So a lot of the mentoring she provides for me is when I have a challenge, I go to her and I talk to her about what I'm dealing with, and she'll share from her experience and from all the various different businesses that she's interacted with in building a multi-million-pound business and selling it for a very high value. And she's also the light and the inspiration behind the Fast Forward 15 program. So very fortunate to have her as my mentor. So now we're looking at valuing women and men's contributions equally. So a number of questions in this area. What you want to remember is the advice that Pledge for Parity International Women's Day provides, which is look for diverse perspectives. Don't just think that a woman's view is right or an engineer's view is right or an English person's view is right. Seek out different perspectives, because that provides an environment for innovation, for creativity, and for success. If you're somebody who's in the fortunate position of building teams, build diverse teams. Make sure you've got a good blend of different people in your team, and make sure you have the skills to manage that, because that's quite challenging. So develop yourself in managing diverse teams. And make sure when you engage in networks, don't just go to women's networks. Pardon me. Engage in mixed networks so that you can develop and hear different perspectives, and you can increase your understanding of unconscious bias. And the final area in the Women's Day agenda is create inclusive, flexible cultures. I work in a team of unmarried men with no children. So clearly that's not at the moment an inclusive or a flexible culture, or may not be, right? So that makes it challenging. So what you want to look at when you're in that environment is, what can you do to build trust? How can you increase the diversity in that team? You may be in a position where you can influence that directly. If you're not, look at how you can influence the men in the team where they're recruiting, the people who are recruiting, to look at how they can introduce more diversity into the team. Okay, the second question, what is it about the C-suite that should be attractive to women who want something entirely different from career and life? Well, the point is, an inclusive workplace will not assume that everybody wants to go for the C-suite. I certainly don't assume that everyone does. And it's really being able to find your place along the spectrum of full-time mother to ambitious career woman, C-suite potential, and knowing where you want to be and honouring that. And once you honour that, you'll be able to communicate in a way that other people understand it. The final question, I think, is a great example of how to build an inclusive and flexible culture, which is looking at how can you endorse each other instead of being competitive and obstructive with each other. And I think this begins a little bit like where we began, actually, with Kamal Hodi, and looking at initiating that for yourself, bringing people together and saying, look, we've got some great skills, we've got different skills, how can we support each other to be successful? And almost creating your own network at work. Maybe a formal network, maybe an informal network, but really looking at how can we support each other to be successful. So those are the 5 areas. I hope you found that useful and that it's helped you find your pledge for parity. Remember to create your little video on your phone and tweet it to us so that we can figure out who's got the best pledge for parity video and offer you an hour's worth of coaching to really look at how you can develop your pledge for parity and make it be successful. And finally, I want to remind you about my pledge for parity, the webinar and Facebook community that we're putting together for you so that you can join us and we can have more in-depth conversations about the questions that you're raising. So let me tell you a little bit about this so that you can work out whether it's for you. So we're going to meet once a month on the webinar. It's going to be the last Monday of every month. We're going to spend 2 hours together and we're going to look in detail at one specific topic each time. It's going to be a fully interactive webinar, so it's going to be two-way. You'll be able to join us. Those of you who like to show your video will be able to share your face with us and talk. It'll be voice and text based, so for those of you who really want to hide, you can use instant messaging and that'll be fine. The Facebook community is going to be critical to this. So this is going to be your virtual network where you can meet people you can trust. I'll personally coach you and I'll support you through that Facebook environment. So whatever questions you post on there, I'll make sure that I look at them and I'll give you some input. And that will really form the content of our webinars. So based on what's being discussed on Facebook, and I might well ask you, what is it you're dealing with? What do you want to discuss on our webinar? And if you like, I might even coach you live on the webinar on your topic. So, you know, I think it's very exciting. I think it's going to be fun. And through that network, you'll have champions, you'll have a space to endorse each other as well. So as I said, I made it low cost so that it's affordable for everyone. Certainly in the UK, this is the cost of a few cups of coffee, £25 a month. If you choose to pay it all up front, I'm giving you 2 months on me, so that we don't have to work with all the admin and so forth. So that would be £250 if you pay up front. So I hope you think that's good value. If you're interested, please email my assistant, Wendy. It's wendy@ishreenbradley.com. Or if you want to pay up front and book directly, you can go to the Eventbrite page, which you'll find at bit.ly/pledge for Parity, and book your place. There are 15 upfront payment places available. So I hope you'll find that interesting. Please go to those, go to the website or go to your email and let us know if you'd like to join us. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, here are Morgan McKinley's and my contact details, and I look forward to meeting you on the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, and remember to pledge for Parity today.